cuts will be made with those in mind of the most disadvantaged children, that no one will lose out in the discussions that are taking place, and that it won't be just mock A-level results that are taken into consideration, but wider considerations in thinking about that. And these results and answers will come very soon, because these children will be very worried about their future.
The Honourable Lady raises an important point. Yes, we will be doing that. We'll also be looking at a mechanism to ensure that those who do not feel that the result that is truly reflective of their work, as to how we make sure that we have a proper and substantive appeal mechanism.
The private nursery sector provides an absolutely crucial role in enabling parents, but particularly mothers, to go back to work. They are absolutely crying out for clarity and support from the government, and feel very strongly, in the words of my constituent Lou Simmons, that they have seen pubs and retail get a great deal more assistance than they have. Can my right honourable friend provide clarity about whether they are entitled to the business rates holiday, and whether he will consider extending more support to that sector so that they can continue to provide crucial support at a really desperate time?
My right honourable friend raises an important point, and they are eligible for business rates relief, but even more importantly, the continued support of revenue that they'll be receiving from the government for the cohorts of children they'll be having there will be continuing, which of course is a key element that they need to have in order to continue to pay staff.
Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I press the Secretary of State for clear guidance on the private nursery sector, and whether this statement includes them? And can he also give clearer guidance to non-local authority youth groups and clubs who presumably know that they can't meet, but will require clear instructions from the government so that they are covered in all circumstances, including relevant to insurance purposes?
Yes. It won't be suitable for them to meet, but there is an important aspect for the whole voluntary sector as to how they can look at playing an important role in contributing in many different ways to this national endeavour to deal with this crisis that our whole nation faces. And there will probably be a substantive role for many such organisations to look at playing within some of the school settings, as of course these organisations will have individuals who are DBS checked.
David Davis.
The categories will have most difficulty with this decision are the parents of children at special needs schools. As the Honourable Lady pointed out, some of them residential. Is any particular provision being made to support those parents?
We recognise that there are a small number of children who will be in a special school that has a residential setting, and in a number of these cases it will be important and essential for that setting to remain open, and we'll be looking at those individually as to how best we support those settings. Also critically as to how we ensure that they have the right type of staffing, as they will be affected, suffer the effects of the spread of this virus as other educational establishments will do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to the voucher system that the Minister pointed out, we are about to see an explosion in the number of people who are eligible for free school meals because of the downturn in the economy. So can he guarantee today that it won't just be those who are eligible as of last week, but who would be eligible in the future, which has always been a problematic thing to get people on the right benefits to claim free school meals?
Yes, we can.
Bill Wiggin.
This Easter holiday was for good students their opportunity to revise, so we don't have a great deal of time to give proper guidance for A-level and GCSE students. How long will they expect before they know exactly what's going to happen?
We'll be giving very clear guidance for all schools and all students. There won't be exams that will be taking place this year, and we'll be making sure that every child who is due to be sitting GCSEs, A-levels or any other form of qualification as they come up, they'll be expecting those results in August. We'll be making sure that they are properly, the work that they've done is properly reflected in those GCSEs and A-levels.
Neil Zach.
Can you say a bit more about the advice being given to universities? And he'll also know that international students are hugely important in many places.
Right. Yeah.
And can he press UKVI to be flexible in the way they apply the Tier 4 visa rules. We don't want students being told that they're being penalised because they switch to online learning.
This was an issue that was raised with me yesterday by Universities UK. We are in contact with the Home Office to take up the point that the Honourable Gentleman raises. We must also recognise that we have a duty and obligation for those many international students who are here in the United Kingdom but are not in a position to be able to return home, and making sure that there is the accommodation in terms of students' halls of residence that continues to remain available for them until they're in a position to be able to return to their loved ones.
Drew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, all our constituents will be grateful to my right honourable friend for the measured and practical statement that he has made today, and in particular for his words of support and gratitude for all those who work in our schools and colleges. He said that more information would be available from the Cabinet Office in respect of key workers and vulnerable children. Can he say a bit more about those two specific groups and how we will exercise as a society our duty of care to them?
Well, I feel as if I'm could be in danger of actually sort of starting to draw a list at some stage as to who those key workers will be, and it's probably and that is going to be provided and done by the Cabinet Office, and that is going to be done, and made available from tomorrow for those people to be able to give them clarity, but also to ensure that school leaders have a clear understanding of who those key worker groups are.
Apsana Begum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents live in incredibly overcrowded households. Those who are grandparents will find themselves looking after children from Friday onwards, whilst parents who are not key workers will be going to work. Social distancing and self-isolation is practically impossible in those situations. What guidance and advice can the Minister give in this regard?
Well, we very much recognise that the challenges that many families will face. We've had to prioritise in terms of the issue of taking every action possible to stem this virus, and this is why we've taken, with a deeply heavy heart, the action that we have. We'll be looking at key workers, and those who are from those vulnerable children account for approximately 10% of the school-age population, and that is what the type of provision that we'll be looking to provide. But we have to look at the issue in terms of what action can be taken to stem this virus, and the scientific advice is that this is the best step to be taken.
Graham.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate this is an incredibly difficult announcement for the Secretary of State, and it almost certainly raises more questions than it answers. But on the detail, can I flag up two things? Firstly, in terms of SEN schools, there is an outstanding SEN school, Milestone, just outside my constituency, which the children there will be very difficult for their parents to look after at school. And any clarification he can give if a school wished to continue, for example, would be helpful. And secondly, in terms of apprenticeships, many people leaving school with GCSEs in maths and English, which are essential for apprenticeships, will want to know whether they will still be eligible. And what will happen to those apprentices who are studying at FE colleges but will no longer be able to do so? Will they lose their apprenticeships?
No one is going to be in a position where we are taking away the work that they've been doing in terms of their apprenticeships, and we've already made it clear to the college sector as well as those independent training providers who deliver so many apprenticeships that the funding for these apprenticeships is continuing. In terms of the special schools, all of those children who have an EHCP plan will be included as those children designated as vulnerable children.
Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister advise on the discussions he's had with the Education Minister in Northern Ireland? I understand the Department for Education will shortly be making an announcement about schools in Northern Ireland. And will he assure us that those discussions will continue in terms of any review of this decision going forward?
Over the last week and more, I've been very privileged to have a number of discussions both with the Education Minister and the First Minister for Northern Ireland, as we've done everything we can do to coordinate our approach to this common challenge in terms of defeating this virus. We'll continue to have a close dialogue between the Assembly and the administration in Northern Ireland and my department.
Allen.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the Minister for his commitment to children in care and on the fringes of care. There will be some children who teachers are concerned about that don't have a social worker or an ECH plan. Can those teachers be involved in the decision-making process? And please could you also press for teachers and social workers to be included as key workers?
I can assure the Honourable Lady that teachers and social workers will be included in the designation of key workers, and I note in the House a number of people have raised the issue of an element of flexibility for teachers and head school leaders to be able to show an element of discretion. We mustn't forget that the reason we're taking this action is to limit the spread of the virus, and the fact that the scientific and medical advice is that to take this action will be by reducing the number of children who are in education settings, will have an impact in terms of reducing the spread of the virus. But looking at how we give elements of flexibility, I've heard what the House says, I will certainly take that back.
Unsing Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable friend, the member for Ashton-under-Lyne, pointed out, millions of children in our country live in poverty, and that is why I particularly welcome the Secretary of State's announcement with regards to the voucher system. However, in his responses hitherto, there's been a palpable lack of detail with regards to the voucher system. How will they be redeemed? Where will they be redeemed? And I fear that without attention to detail, that voucher system will merely become worthless pieces of paper.
That certainly will not be the case, and we recognise, and on this side of the House completely understand the importance of ensuring every child who is eligible for free school meals is able to receive them and be able to get food. But we do recognise this is a situation that we may be dealing with not just for a few weeks but for quite a long and sustained period of time, and we'd want to move to a more conventional system in order to be able to get money to families in the best possible way. But there is another aspect of the fact that the reason we came up with the process of free school meals is the fact that a child to be able to go to a school and be able to receive a meal, we recognise that's an incredibly powerful thing to be able to offer, and that's something that we're going to be looking at. Is there a way of delivering that much more broadly in so many more schools? But that will be dependent on the number of schools that we're able to have open and have available.
Ian Little-Granger.
Can I just ask the Secretary of State, the Secretary of State has answered questions to two of my colleagues on very special schools. I have two in Bridgewater, Penrose and Elmwood. These schools, if they shut down, these are children who have some of the most difficult challenges in society. I don't understand yet what the Secretary of State is going to do to make sure those children are cared for through the county council system, through the social work system, and their parents are by and large working. We need clarification. These children cannot be left without major help.
I'm quite sure that the schools that my honourable friend refers to will have children who will have an education and a healthcare plan, and that is the reason why they're attending that school, so therefore they would be included in the category of vulnerable.
Vet Cooper.
Many parents will think this is the right thing to do for their kids and to stop the virus spreading, but they're also going to be really worried that they just can't afford to stop work to look after them and can't get the grandparents to step in. Given that he said that this could last for some time, will he look at urgent financial support for parents, not just those on free school meals, but for all parents in these circumstances, or look at working with local councils on free childcare options in much smaller settings or one-to-one settings that could help?
That is certainly something that we've been discussing with the Treasury, and certainly something that we'll be highlighting as part of a wider range of economic issues that the Chancellor recognises he needs to address.
Mark Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of key workers, I think it's going to be a little more complex than the Secretary of State says. For example, those that work in our food distribution sector. But the question I wanted to ask him was on what he said about schools being closed until further notice. And thinking back to the question the Prime Minister was asked at PMQs today by our Right Honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, does he have any expectation that schools will open for the population as a whole at any time before the end of this year?
Obviously, my greatest hope is that we could get schools opened very, very rapidly. But I'm going to be guided by the best scientific or medical advice in terms of when we do that. The honourable gentleman, my right honourable friend, also refers to the fact that key workers shouldn't just be seen as NHS professionals, and it's much broader. This is something that is very clearly understood by the Cabinet Office, and it will be reflective of that fact.
Bridget Phillipson.
The Secretary of State has called upon nurseries and early years providers to be part of a national effort to combat this. So can I ask when the government will set out what steps they'll be taking to provide additional financial support to nurseries, going beyond the funding he set out in terms of the continuation of the funding for places? Because my worry is that if we don't provide additional support very quickly, staff will be laid off and some of these nurseries may never reopen.
Hear, hear.
As I've alluded to earlier, we've already guaranteed the government funding, regardless of what their pupil numbers are, in terms of continued funding for all of those nursery settings. So we've already done it.
Sherlyn McCall.
Minister was ill.
Will my right honourable friend join me in thanking all of the staff and everybody involved, along with parents, in the effort that they've made so far, and actually the common sense and sensible approach they've taken to this so far in keeping schools open. We need to understand that we're doing this for a national effort, and everybody has to play their part to keep the NHS at a capacity that it can cope with this virus, and this is part of that effort. My one concern in my area, which is a rural area, is will the school transport provision still be in place for those children that still need to attend their school because they're eligible to? Thank you.
We certainly very much hoping that the school transport system will be there. We're obviously dependent on other strains within the transport network, but my right honourable friend highlights the importance of really saying an enormous thank you to so many of those public servants who have been doing so much to support parents, support families, and most importantly support children. And we're incredibly indebted to them, but we recognise we'll be still asking an awful lot more of them in the future.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, my mind is boggling at the logistical challenge that is about to face schools, and I add my voice to thanks in advance for what they're about to do. This is going to raise more questions than anything else. Last week, the helpline that was set up by the DFE was overwhelmed with questions such that it stopped working. So if schools have questions, where should they go? And on the point for EHCPs, he will know that it can take up to 2 years to get them. 9 out of 10 that go to the Ombudsman are then found in the favour of the parents. Is it not time to just grant all EHCPs in the system so that all children, even if they are on the margins of being vulnerable, are getting the help that they need?
The Honourable Lady mentions the helpline. We've put extra resource onto the helpline and we made sure that's open over weekends. We'll also be writing directly to schools with a clear set of guidance as to how to proceed. Our regional school commissioners are working closely with local education authorities in order to be able to provide all the information that's needed going forward.
Jason McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the Secretary of State is trying to bring clarity here. My question's on GCSEs. He's clearly said they're not going to happen. There will be some kind of system for them being awarded. When he comes back and tells us how that system's going to work, presumably then the Year 11 students will know exactly what their grades are. In fact, they may know their grades in the next few weeks. And this comes at an emotional cost to Year 11 students who have been revising hard, studying hard, preparing themselves for the biggest educational challenge of their lives so far. What support will be put in place to help with the emotional challenge those Year 11 students will be going through?
Well, I recognise, like everyone else, that this is not what you would call an ideal situation, and I certainly did not want to be the Education Secretary that was the one to cancel all exams. We realise that we have to have a fair system, in order to properly reflect the work that all pupils have put into their GCSEs, A-levels and other qualifications they've been entered into. We recognise that this comes at some considerable emotional cost as they've been working together. We are in exceptional circumstances. We're not in a position that we're able to do the usual settings and usual support that you would expect within a school, but we'll be looking at different ways that we can support young people through what is going to be a difficult and challenging time as they face up to the reality of the fact that the school or the college that they are obviously incredibly fond of and been part of their life for such a long time is not going to be part of their everyday life.
Clement Jones.
The Secretary of State said that councils will play a key part in this announcement. Yesterday, the Chancellor announced a whole range of new measures for the economy. Durham County Council spent all day trying to get guidance on that, only to be told that it'll not be available till Friday. Can I ask him when guidance to what his announcement today will be given to councils? And separately, can he answer the question that was raised by the Shadow Secretary of State referring to supply teachers? These people have not got permanent contracts. Right. They're going to find they have no income. He spoke warm words about teachers. These are teachers as well who need support.
Hear, hear. There is. We will certainly be writing to all local authorities and to all schools in terms of guidance, and that will be today. Before I came to the House, I was speaking to the Director of Children's Services, who represents the Association of Directors of Children's Services, before I came to the House, talk about what we're doing and actually how we needed, and they were very clear about the need to work together, both local government and national government. And in terms of supply teachers, there is going to be an exceptional demand for the services of all teachers within the system, those who are on regular contracts and also supply contract teachers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will pay teachers when their schools are closed because the closure is not their fault and we will need them again. But that applies to many other employees across the economy. And this could be addressed very straightforwardly if the government would bring forward urgently a package to support employees' wages right across the economy. So will the Secretary of State, when he finishes this statement, talk to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor to ask them to turn their attention within the next few hours to make a statement on support for employees generally across the economy?
I'd be more than happy to pass on such representations.
West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No one doubts the scale of the challenge facing the Secretary of State, and his job would frankly have been made much easier had the Chancellor come forward last night with provision to provide income protection for people right across the economy. So I hope he will take that message back. But his statement this afternoon contains considerable holes too. What arrangements will be put in place for people sitting vocational assessments and teaching? Could he say more about what's going on in further education? And with regards to vulnerable children, there will be children living in my constituency in temporary bed and breakfast accommodation in awful conditions where school is an escape from the conditions that they live in at home, who are not subject to EHCPs and do not have social workers. So as well as coming forward with more answers and detailed answers about key workers, can he also now set out in detail what we mean by vulnerable children? Because if we're asking people to prepare and not to panic, the government needs to be prepared, because otherwise statements like his this afternoon will lead to panic.
I believe that what the Honourable Gentleman was referring to in terms of some of those children and his concerns about them, I would very much imagine that they would be included in terms of a package of those children who are most vulnerable and would be included in that.
Danny Kruger.
I appreciate that children are not going to be sitting any exams this year, but is the expectation that they're going to continue to receive an education? Is there anything we can do to support schools to deliver remote teaching and to support parents who want to help with home learning?
Well, as my honourable friend will be aware, schools have already been doing a lot of work in terms of providing work and the ability for children to continue to study if schools were in a situation of closing. We're working closely with the BBC, and we're looking at putting more resources online in order to be able to support children to be able to continue to learn even if they're not in an education setting.
Thank you. You spoke about the Secretary of State spoke about teachers getting paid, but many others work in schools, including lunchtime supervisors, caretakers, cleaners, many of whom are contract staff. Will all school staff carry on getting paid, or only teachers and those on full-time guaranteed contracts?
It probably will not surprise the honourable gentleman that we will continue to fully fund schools and that those people who are working in schools will continue to get paid.
Sir Desmond Swain.
How will large numbers of young people released from school be persuaded to stay at home and avoid social contact?
The honourable gentleman poses a challenge, and I think it is, as a father with two teenage daughters, I'm very acutely aware of the desire for youngsters to socialise. But what we are facing in this country is not normal. It's not something that any of us have seen in our childhood. These are not a situation that any of us would have liked to see or to be in. And we do have to accept that there are going to have to be a different set of behaviours as every one of us are going to exhibit in order to be able to stem this virus. And that comes with challenges. But the steps that we're taking, the only reason that we're taking them is because we believe that this is a step that will go towards ensuring that this virus does not spread as widely as it could do.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, we've got 48 hours before schools close. We have no clear list of who is going to be able to send their children to school next week or after the Easter holidays. We've known for several weeks that we were going to reach this stage. So can the Secretary of State say what preparation has he had with LEAs and schools to help draw up these lists and set out a plan to keep these schools open? Because I think it's the right move, but I don't think the preparation has been done.
Yeah. Honourable gentleman would have probably heard my response earlier that the list of key workers is going to be published tomorrow. That will be available for schools, and we're very conscious that we need to get that information to all schools as swiftly as possible.
Andrew Lower.
As chairman of their all-party group, I bring a positive message from the independent education sector that they're part of their communities and they want to help and they want the department to know that. But there's also a concern. Will boarding schools be allowed to or be expected to continue caring for any remaining boarders, especially international, who have not or cannot go home?
My honourable friend highlights an issue that is quite common with the university sector and international students there. And as I said, in terms of international students in a university setting, we have to recognise the obligations we have to those young people, and we'd recognise that in terms of boarding schools as well.
Justin Mabbers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many ours is one that was facing exams this year, both GCSEs and A-levels, and I think there is certainly some disappointment that my children are not going to be facing those challenges this year. I think they may be slightly happier at the moment, but I think when reality sets in, they will feel disappointed as well. But I understand why this process is necessary. Just want to ask, in terms of the appeal process you're envisaging, will that be completed by the time that options are chosen for next year?
We're obviously, there is a standard appeal process in terms of exam grades, and that has always been structured in a way to ensure that it is completed before universities. We are looking at additional measures that will be put in place, such as the ability for a child to rapidly take a fresh set of tests or exams, but we have to be conscious of the fact we do not know how this virus will manifest itself and in what sort of timescales we're going to see peak and we're going to see reduction. So I'm not in a position to be able to say as to what dates that will happen, and the consequences of this virus may have additional knock-on effects to other institutions and academic years.
Mr. Speaker, as a parent of two primary-age children, I know that the conversation about how best to provide routine and educational support at home has been going on in school communities for quite some time. Schools, as he rightly says, are working very hard to rush out resources to be able to use at home. But in my previous role as on the Education Select Committee, I met with many education technology companies who already have excellent apps and resources that exist online. What can his department do to help promote and highlight some of those existing resources to parents?
Well, we already have an EdTech strategy in terms of promoting this, but what we will see is a much more rapid and speedy evolution of some of these learning aids and resources, and we've got to look at how best we can harness new technology in order to ensure that all children are in a position to be able to get the very best out of education, even in these coming weeks ahead.
List.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State to say some more about special schools, please, like Gibbside in my constituency, which has children with very special needs. Is the Secretary of State saying that schools like Gibbside will remain open? And what support can be given to the staff in that case?
We would have to recognise that schools such as Gibbside will be facing considerable pressures as a result of, in terms of staffing and the spread of the virus, but also in terms of pupils who may be unwell. Many children who attend special schools such as Gibbside will be on EHCP plans, and that would obviously put them into that category of children, vulnerable children, that would be looking at making sure there is continued provision.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this has been a really sobering statement, and I want to put on record how much I appreciate the tone that the Secretary of State has used, and also the opposition spokesman. My question is on behalf of university students. What will they pay for their tuition fees?
Currently, there are no plans to change the tuition fees. The key, and obviously, as has been highlighted, the fact that universities will continue teaching through online versions. We'll be working very closely with Universities UK to ensure that their students have their grades in a timely manner, and to ensure that they're able to move on to the next stage of their lives.
Laura.
Our schools are not only amazing centres of learning, they're also centres of support for children living in poverty. 48% of children in Newcastle Central. So I want to ask the Secretary of State, on free school meals, is he looking at ensuring the delivery of hot meals to children's homes, as Newcastle City Council is looking at? And on online learning, he talks of encouraging that, but there is a digital divide in this country, and the libraries which help to close that are closing themselves. So will he guarantee access to broadband for all children whose schools are shut?
What we would be certainly looking at, working with local authorities such as Newcastle City Council, in terms of making sure that we have the broadest provision in terms of meals for children and how best that is delivered. As I touched upon earlier in the statement, we will look at how we can grow that and expand that, not just in Newcastle, many other areas. The Honourable Lady highlights an important point about a digital divide in this country. We'll be looking at working with schools to ensure that even if people do not have access to digital resources, to how they can have other resources that enable them to learn when schools are closed.
James Wilde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The expert advice until now has been that a consequence of closing schools is that children may have to stay with their grandparents, who are the most vulnerable people. What's the advice now for parents? Should they take advantage of grandparents? And if not, can I urge that the support package that the Chancellor is looking at addresses this issue?
We would very much ask all parents to look at the advice that's given by Public Health England. Obviously, there are many grandparents who are very young and healthy, but we need them to look at the individual circumstances in their family in order to be able to make the best assessment, because what we do need to do is we need to protect those who are most vulnerable, and of course those are those who are over the age of 70 and those are the ones who have the underlying health conditions.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for this statement today and for the tone in which he's conducted himself. I have two questions. The first on A-levels. Is he able to offer more detail about when the alternative form of assessment will be published? Secondly, on university admissions, could he update the House on what discussions he's had with the university sector to ensure that university admissions are fair?
We will be making sure that we publish further advice next week in terms of A-levels. Yes, we have had discussions with Universities UK. We need to be looking as to how we can ensure that universities are open and ready to take in a new cohort of students in the next academic year, but the fairness of the system and making sure that young people don't miss out on opportunities that they've worked so hard for is very much at the core of what we are going to be doing.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for addressing the concerns I raised about vulnerable children in Wolverhampton. All of these extraordinary measures are with the aim of preserving life, and to do that we need to maximise capacity in our NHS. What implications for our staff in the NHS will these measures achieve?
Well, I'd like to thank my honourable friend for raising this issue a few days with me, and obviously being constituency neighbours, this is sort of something that we're both acutely aware of in terms of needing to tackle that. The reasons that we have taken these measures is to reduce the chance and the spread of infection. The reason that we've taken the difficult choice in terms of making educational settings available for key workers is to ensure that hospitals, brilliant hospitals such as New Cross in Wolverhampton, are continuing to be able to function and offer the support and the vital healthcare that is needed for not just her constituents but also my constituents in South Staffordshire.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would be very helpful if the Secretary of State could give a very clear timetable when he'll make an announcement about A-levels, particularly, but also GCSEs, because pupils will be worrying. But I wanted to follow up from my honourable friends from Poplar and Canning Town and Ilford North about children who are living in severely overcrowded conditions in my constituency, in homeless hostels where at least you can identify by the address they're in that situation, but more particularly in overcrowded flats where you have one family in the living room and one in the bedroom, and very often parents who have no recourse to public funds. There is going to be a very big problem for those children who are going to be vulnerable, but many of whom are not looked after and no social worker. I'm sure, I hope, that his department has considered this. And could he please give us some information now about what he's going to do about that with colleagues across government? And if he can't do it now, could he tell us when he will brief those of us who have this endemic problem in our constituencies?
Well, certainly, the reason that we've announced the response that we have is to make sure that it covers a broader range of children, not just those of key workers, but those who are vulnerable. If the Honourable Lady would like to write to me with specific suggestions as to, if there are actions that she feels that the department could look at undertaking, of course, my concern and my interest is making sure that we do everything in the interest of both stemming this virus, but also protecting the interests and of those children, no matter where they live in this country.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Friend, clarify if the children he outlined earlier will continue to attend the same school, and what considerations have been given to children to teacher ratios and class sizes. Small schools like Zetland Primary School and Redcar may struggle in the current climate.
Well, as part of the bill that we're bringing forward, we are going to be removing the ratios that do present some of the challenges to schools. But I would be wrong to give my honourable friend the promise that children will necessarily be able to continue to attend the school that they're currently able to do, because we don't know at the moment as to the consequences of the spread of this virus, and we may need to show a high degree of flexibility in terms of how we provide that support and care, and that may sometimes require children to be attending different schools, hopefully in close proximity to their home. But we do recognise the challenges that are going to be raised as a result of this announcement.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Referring to universities, they are expecting a huge hit financially because international students won't be able to come over despite some online learning. So what support will be provided for universities such as University of Bedfordshire in my constituency, given that they've got to assure that they won't go bankrupt, because the Government and Office for Students have said previously they would not usually step in under such circumstances?
The financial health of the university sector is obviously of key critical interest to us. We'll be working closely with Universities UK to ensure the stability and the strength of this important sector, not just in terms of learning, but also in terms of the economy. What we would urge universities who are going to be facing financial difficulties and pressures to start engaging with an early dialogue in terms of being honest about some of the challenges that they're going to face financially, or otherwise it is very difficult to be able to respond if something comes out of the blue. But the issue of international students is important. We've got to be realistic that the number of international students that will be attending UK universities would be expected to be lower next year, and how we work with the sector to replace that capacity in different ways is something that the department's already working on, and certainly already having those discussions with UK.
Philip Oliver.
Speaker, there are 6 big secondary schools in the borough of Kettering. Does the Secretary of State envisage that in terms of continuing the education of children of key workers, that those cohorts are educated in the 6 separate schools, or that some arrangement is made between the schools for them all to come together and teach the children in one place?
In the initial instance, we would hope that provision could be provided in the schools that the child is attending, but we recognise with the spread of the virus that is not going to be a realistic thing that we're able to do all the way through there, so we will have to look at how we show flexibility. I have no doubt, as in many towns and boroughs up and down this country, there is always already a deep level of cooperation between schools in the local community, and in terms of sharing resource and sharing learning, and there's often very good partnerships, but we'll be working with local education authorities as well as regional schools commissioners in order to be able to help facilitate that.
Intense.
At the moment, every infant school child is entitled to a free school meal, and in my constituency it's all the junior school pupils as well. Can he confirm that he envisages all those who currently are entitled to free school meals being able to receive them in the future, irrespective of the income criteria that apply in secondary schools? If a school opts for a voucher solution, what does he expect each voucher to buy?
Hear, hear.
This will be an entitlement for all children who would be normally in receipt of free school meals, as against a much broader entitlement. What we'd be hoping is that families with the vouchers would be able to make best use of that money to make sure that it goes as far as possible, and we'd certainly be hoping that it is a nutritious and good lunch. But going back to what the Honourable lady, the Honourable Gentleman's colleague, raised about actually how we can work with local authorities and schools to be offering more hot meals on premises is something that we're looking at, but we have to recognise there are going to be constraints within the system, especially with the spread of the virus. It won't necessarily mean that that is always going to be possible.
Ben Everett.
Speaker, can my right honourable friend confirm that the forthcoming coronavirus emergency legislation will contain measures to disapply certain restrictions and regulations that will allow schools to react and adapt to these difficult times?
I can absolutely assure my honourable friend that that will be the case, and that is why we're bringing forward the bill.
Kate Green.
I apologise to the Secretary of State if I've missed or not caught everything he said about early years settings, childminders, nurseries, both private and statutory, and all other early years provision. Is he saying that all of those are being advised or instructed to close, Or is he saying that some should remain open, and if they close, is he able to guarantee that all staff will continue to receive full pay irrespective of the nature of the setting?
It does apply across the board. What we've already done in terms of those early year settings is we wrote to them informing them that the funding that we have been providing for them is going to continue regardless of changes in terms of the number of children attending those settings. So it gives them some stability in terms of funding in the future.
Scott Benson.
Mr. Speaker, there will be many voluntary groups who will be keen to work with schools and parents to provide additional support for vulnerable children going forward, for example, in breakfast clubs. Will my right honourable friends thank the voluntary groups for the work they do and encourage schools to continue to work with them to support vulnerable children in these difficult times?
Well done. Well, I know that my honourable friend is a great champion for such issues in his constituency of Blackpool South, and it's a great privilege to be able to join him on a visit just recently to one of his high schools in his constituency. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the many volunteers who contribute so much to our schooling system, and we do recognise in these unique times that we'll be turning to whole communities in terms of supporting one another, in terms of supporting those who are most vulnerable, whether young or old, in terms of getting through the coming weeks.
Weston.
Speaker, according to Warwickshire Public Health, 43% of nurses have children in schools. That obviously accounts for a great number. And when you add into that other blue light services and other key workers, it would be interesting to see what comes out tomorrow, as the Secretary of State said. But the concern has to be that many parents, workers are going to withdraw from employment because their priority will be their children, and the impact that's going to have on so many sectors. So perhaps he could just elaborate on how he sees that. In terms of vouchers, can I urge him to prioritise the use of community cafes and to address the issue of child protection? And finally, perhaps just in terms of online education, France is ahead of us. They already have lessons online for all schools. Perhaps you could look at that.
The reason that we've taken the action in terms of key workers, the honourable gentleman highlighted the very high proportion of those who are working in the NHS who have children of school age. That's why it's been so vital that we've taken the action that we have in order to be able to assist them in continuing in our battle against this virus.
Robert Largan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the statement which will help reduce the risk of the virus spreading while allowing NHS workers who are parents to stay on the front line where they're most needed. I want to highlight Glossopdale School, who've already offered to deliver packed lunches to the homes of pupils on free school meals, perhaps a model that others might want to look at. And can I urge the Secretary of State to make certain that the full details of who are vulnerable children and key workers are communicated both to schools and parents as soon as possible so everyone knows where we stand?
We certainly will be doing that, and I think that my honourable friend highlights the fact that schools, head teachers and all those support staff constantly go above and beyond in terms of supporting children who are within their care.
Pongasari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He mentioned he'll be working with University UK to look at the financial challenges they may face. I'm concerned about the lack of clear information about what direct support the government will be giving to those in higher education. Has the Secretary of State thought about the changes that will happen to student finance payments? Has he looked at how degrees will be decided? And finally, what support will be given to international students should they wish to go back home?
Yes, we have looked in terms of what we need to do. The key thing, as I touched upon in response to the Honourable Member for Bedford, is if universities are in financial distress, they would need to be highlighting this at the earliest possible stage in order for us to be able to look as to how we're best to deal with it. In terms of international students, we do recognise our obligation to international students in terms of if they're not able to return to their home country, to make sure that they have continued accommodation here, and the university sector has been absolutely excellent in terms of responding to that and making sure it's been available. But there'll be some students who just aren't able to return home, and that's why we'll continue to support them.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend said that he expects schools and nurseries to remain open during the Easter holidays for the children of key workers and vulnerable children. Can he set out what sort of service he expects those schools to provide during the Easter holidays and what additional help they will get to do so?
We do recognise that what we can't be asking that schools and education settings are providing a normal school curriculum. We do recognise that it's important to provide activities that engage and encourage young people to be able to attending those, and we'll be working across the board, but there's no better people than teachers to really understand what engages children and actually keeps them motivated.
Mr. Speaker, last summer Feed in Bristol distributed 53,000 meals to children, 75% of whom would otherwise have been in receipt of free school meals. But they did that in collective settings, so like summer play schemes. Now we're in a very different scenario. We were talking about getting meals out to children in individual places. What support could he give to organisations like Feed in Bristol to help them facilitate the sort of work that they've been doing?
Well, we will be working very closely with schools in terms of actually how we ensure that there is a proper distribution in terms of and support, and we have made it clear to schools, and I hope I made it clear early in the statement, that costs that they do incur will be fully reimbursed.
Felicity Buchan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend said in answer to a previous question that schools could potentially form together into clusters. And I do think that makes sense in central London where schools are close together. Can I just ask him what will be the process of organising that? Who's going to take the lead? Is it the local authority? And clearly there's not much time to make these arrangements.
Well, key elements of that will obviously be the local education authority, obviously regional schools commissioners working together in order to be able to promote those clusters. There's already a high level of cross-working between schools, but in order to make sure that we have a provision right throughout this crisis, we do recognise that if we have that working together, it's a much more robust provision for everyone in that local community.
Bill Esterson.
Children face additional risks when family relationships are under pressure, and one way of reducing some of the additional strain that will go onto families will be the financial response to this. So can I urge him to take forward what his right honourable friend from Tunbridge Wells said about income replacement, and can I also ask him to come forward with plans about how he is going to support the child protection workforce and take a proper risk assessment of the additional challenges that are faced in this crisis by children.
Well, I'll certainly take up a point that the honourable gentleman made to make sure that there's representation made to the Chancellor and Prime Minister.
Andy Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the earlier comments of my right honourable friend and pay tribute to the incredible work that teachers have been doing over the last few weeks. I've spoken to many heads in Warrington this afternoon. They've been fantastic, and the last few weeks have really shown true spirit in the classroom, teachers and support staff. Can I ask my right honourable friend if the government will be reimbursing schools for any additional costs they incur in providing free school meals for children once schools have closed? And if schools do choose to use voucher schemes, can he ensure that those families have priority access to supermarkets?
I can absolutely guarantee that the schools will be fully reimbursed for the costs that they incur as a result of this, and obviously in terms of a long-term measure, we would look at sort of making sure that we do that additional help. On the final point, I will certainly take that up with the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, who would be looking at matters such as that.
Lily Greenwood.
Speaker, I welcome the announcement that education settings are being encouraged to continue to look after the children of key workers and vulnerable children during the Easter holidays. But he knows that many school support staff are only paid for term time working. And whilst I know that those dedicated staff will do all that they can to help in a national crisis, I'm sure he doesn't expect them to work for free. So will schools be supported to meet these extra staffing costs?
Yes, they will be.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Can I pay tribute to the schools and Hull City Council who have already been working on plans to deal with children who get free school meals in the event of schools closing. And it's welcome that we're now having the Department of Education taking the lead on this, and obviously we need more detail. But can I just also ask the Secretary of State whether he would feel able to make representations to the Treasury to take up the recommendation of the Child Poverty Action Group, who are suggesting that one way of getting extra money into families is to increase child benefit by £10 now.
I will certainly pass on that representation and also take the opportunity to thank Hull City Council for the work that they are doing in terms of supporting schools, but also communities right through the city of Kingston upon Hull.
Claudia Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by a great deal number of nurseries in my constituency of Leicester East who understandably are quite worried for the future. It's worth being clear about the detail. And they said, and to quote, "Most of us will not survive more than a month without fee income. For some, it will be a matter of weeks." Nurseries are already under severe financial strain after a decade of government underfunding, and childcare insurers are refusing to support them. So I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to maintain nursery funding, but will he go further today and reassure my constituents by pledging to protect the income of nursery workers for as long as is necessary?
I believe in terms of those early year settings and nurseries, we've probably gone further than any other aspect of business in terms of making it absolutely clear that we'll continue to guarantee their funding, that they're in receipt of from government, regardless of where the role is. We made that statement yesterday. I very much hope that that has been percolating right through the sector, but I will certainly ask my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, to continue to reiterate that issue, that point to all nursery providers.
Sam Tarr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's details and provisions for key workers, including our vital NHS staff, in terms of childcare and the commitment on children of those vital staff being able to both go to nursery or to school. But as the my honourable friend, member for Horton and Sunderland, and my honourable member for Leicester East have said earlier, there is a really serious question about the funding, because in my local education authority in Redbridge, the council is prepared obviously to go forward and to meet the free funding places. But as the Secretary of State will know, much of the funding and the business plans that many of these nurseries have is actually based on the additional top-up of private places at those nurseries. So I just wondered if you could give some more, if the Minister gives some more detail on the funding to ensure that that gap is bridged, so that nurseries are not in a situation of having to lay off staff in the midst of dealing with this crisis.
This is why we have made it clear in terms of continued funding that we would be paying to nurseries, but also why the Chancellor has touched upon the issue of business rate relief, which is obviously an important component to the cost base of many of these nurseries.
Certainly not least, Dr. Rupert Hutt.
Mr. Speaker, as representative of a borough that suffered 64% of cuts under this government, can I ask what additional assistance will be available to Ealing to absorb some of the consequences of this decision? Our libraries, for example, are now volunteer-run on reduced hours when they should be at more than full tilt, or are those going to be next to close? And as mum of a Year 11, are his exams now indefinitely postponed? And for all his cohort, can I ask, will their sixth form admissions, because those aren't automatic nowadays, now be based not on actual, but on predicted grades in a kind of Mystic Meg kind of way?
There'll be nothing else.
What we touched upon is the fact that, and what I outlined is the fact that we will be ensuring that all children who have done so much work towards their exams, both at GCSE and A-level, will get a fair system in terms of their grades. We do recognise that there'll be sometimes disagreement over that, so making sure that we have a proper and robust system and means of redress for those children is absolutely vital, and that is something that we're going to have in place with Ofqual, and we've already had those discussions. In terms of funding, we have been consistent, clear in terms of this statement that costs that are incurred by schools will be fully reimbursed.
A point of order, Tracy.
Speaker, I'm seeking your advice on an urgent and important matter. On Monday, the government advised the public to avoid large gatherings and gatherings in smaller public spaces such as pubs, cinemas, restaurants, theatres, bars and clubs, rather than closing venues directly. The Creative Industry Federation said this was a crippling blow to the UK's creative sector, and there was understandable anxiety that this would mean mass bankruptcies and closures of venues long term. However, we were reassured by the Chancellor yesterday that insurance companies would help, saying for those businesses that have a policy that covers pandemics, the government's action is sufficient and will allow them to make an insurance claim against their policy. He even went so far as to say the government has spoken to the insurance sector looking for support. But many organisations have today made representations to me that insurance companies will not permit losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that any theatre or restaurant or SME would never actually be able to afford that sort of cover that is usually associated with Apple and big companies like that. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, what advice can you offer me how members might seek clarification from ministers on this crucial issue that is actually adding to the anxiety for businesses in the creative industries and more widely?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for giving me notice of the question? What I would say is, as she's well aware, it's not a point of order for the Chair, but quite rightly the Treasury bench would have heard the comments, and I would expect some response that way as well. And also, maybe if we can work through the table office via email at the moment, or picking up the phone to speak to someone, that may also help to resolve the situation. Right, let us go through to motion number 3. The question is that motion number 3... Oh, Minister to move. Formally. The question is that motion number 3 is on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion number 4, Public Accounts Commission. Minister to move. Formally. The question is that motion number 4 is on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Sentencing Pre-Consolidation Amendment Bill Lords, second reading.
Now. Minister to move second reading formally. I beg to move. The question is that the bill now be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes of it. The ayes have it. We now come to motions 6 to 9. With leave of the House, I'll put together. Minister to move. I beg to move. The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. To remind the House that this motion is subject to double majority voting. The whole House, those representing a constituency of England, so we don't need to do that. So we can now carry on to the next 2 motions. With leave of the House, I'd like to put motion 10 and 11 together. Minister. The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is this House do now adjourn. Mr. Ian Little-Granger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start my dissertation by firmly apologising to the Minister, who hasn't had a copy of my speech. So I do apologise. I, Mr. Speaker, managed to send it to the wrong Minister, so I do apologise unreservedly. It just shows how quite incompetent I can be. And believe it or not, Mr. Speaker, I am actually very grateful for this rare opportunity to address the House about a subject that's very close to my heart, and I know a lot of members in this House, farming. And when I talk about farming, I would just ask the Minister just to take in that could we make sure as a Parliament that vets are taken in as key workers. I know that wasn't mentioned today by the Prime Minister, and I'm just taking this opportunity, if I may, to put that forward. Adjournment debates are a little bit like opposition election slogans, especially if you turn it upside down. In our case, it would be for the few, not for the many. But at least the few of us here this evening are demonstrating the best health practices. I am keeping a safe distance from the Minister, and I promise there's no offence intended, of course. But this is a difficult time, I'm afraid, for all of us, farmers included. So can I tell the Minister and you, Mr. Speaker, a little bit more about Bridgewater and West Somerset constituency? At the Bridgewater end, we have some of the lowest lying farmland in the United Kingdom. And at the West Somerset end, particularly on Exmoor, we have some of the highest. Both areas have faced huge challenges, even at the best of times. Down on the levels, so far, we've managed to survive the winter without a repeat of the devastating floods which has emerged 17 miles of Somerset 6 years ago. Back then, I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the Environment Agency was led by deaf donkeys in blindfolds. It took a great deal of persuasion to convince them that the rivers work much better when they're regularly dredged, and I pay enormous tribute to David Cameron for leading that charge. Any of my farmers on the levels could have told them that, and in fact did tell them in no uncertain terms. I went to the meetings. The thing about farmers is that they know the land. They respect the weather. They understand the climate is changing and that we cannot afford to sit back and do nothing. And they, like me, speak our minds. For example, there is a genuine concern about the long-term financial commitment to keep Somerset flood-free. Naturally, I am delighted, and so is the whole of my area, and especially the levels, to welcome the Chancellor's budget, which guaranteed proper funding for the tidal barrage, £114 million. It is incredibly welcome, and I do thank the team. But my honourable friend will be aware of the question mark that continues to hang over the future of the Somerset Rivers Authority. The SRA, as it's commonly known, is a flood prevention organisation. It uses expertise of local drainage boards and the expertise of the most clued-up councils like Sedgemoor District. The authority gets its funding from various public organisations, but also, crucially, relies on a precept which is added to the council tax. It's not unusual, it's rare, but not unusual. Without that tax, elements of all the ambitious plans to safeguard the people from the horrors of flooding would certainly be at risk. As of now, this precept is not enshrined in law. A private member's bill to fix it passed through the House last year, and I'm grateful to the colleagues, but was then sabotaged by all people by the Liberal Democrats in the other place, for reasons I still to this day don't understand. However, I will say the all-new Singing and Dancing Environment Bill could be easily tweaked, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the Rivers Authority can raise what it needs through precepts. I hope my honourable friend will be in a position, perhaps not now, but sometime in the near future, to give us an indication as to how and when this problem could possibly be solved, and I would be happy to have a discussion with my honourable friend about that. Meanwhile, farmers on the Somerset levels remain understandably anxious over our future trading relationships with Europe, as we all are. This is dairy country, not exclusively, but is dairy country, and the dairy industry, as one analyst puts it, very recently is close to broke. We have one of the largest milk companies in the country, Muller. We also are the home of Yeo Valley. And that is why farmers are puzzled and concerned by the decision of the Secretary of State to potentially halt, and it depends how you look at it, the culling of badgers in Somerset. I know it's an emotive subject on all sides, but Mr. Speaker, there is ample evidence that the cull in Somerset is significantly cutting incidence of TB and is proving its worth. That is because it is being done well. I know badgers and their human supporters may take a different view, but I am slightly shocked and worried that the Secretary of State, and I say this advisedly, appears, and I say only appears, to be siding with them. Dairy farmers, as in all farmers, love their animals. They know, as most of this House knows, how TB, bovine TB, can rip through a herd. What kind of message are we sending them? The cull has effectively removed a major health risk. The prospect of vaccinations is still too vague and still too far away. I wonder if the Minister maybe does, understands the economic tightrope dairy farmers and beef farmers already face. The only way really to make any money at a decent level is for milk to be turned into butter, yoghurt and cheese. Many farmers would struggle, if not get bust, if they couldn't do that. Despite all these hurdles, Somerset cheese has developed a worldwide reputation, which is fantastic. But that was before this awful virus stopped worldwide travel, crippled airlines and squeezed economics right out across the globe. A week or so ago, you could visit the swankiest cheese shop in the swankiest food mall in San Francisco and find an unpasteurised Montgomery cheese from Somerset displayed in pride of place. The only complaint that the proprietor had was that he couldn't get enough. Now, he will be very lucky, if not impossible, to receive any supplies at all. Madam Deputy Speaker, cheesemakers such as White Farm also export large quantities to Europe, or they did. But even in the best of times, the margins are uncomfortably tight, and these, Minister, are not the best of times. There is an urban stupidity about farmers that they all plead poverty, they can all find cash to buy flashy new cars each year. We've all heard it. I can assure the House, and I think the House knows this anyway, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not true. Every farmer I've known or have ever known works their socks off to break even. And they're rightly worried about the impact of every new trading hurdle that comes up. The latest threat being to suspend trade at the Sedgemoor Auction Centre, which is commonly known as Junction 24, Junction 24 being the junction on the M5. I have to say that this would be a financial disaster for local farmers. This centre attracts entries from all parts of England and Wales. The impact on the rural economy if it closes, I'm afraid, cannot be underestimated. Farmers, by and large, buy and sell their animals at auction. It is the way it's always been done, and it'd be almost possible to end on the end of a computer, even if you can get a connection, and I will come to that in a minute. I appreciate that tackling this virus is the most urgent national priority, but I would ask the Minister to consider if there are sensible ways in which auction centres such as Sedgemoor can be allowed to continue trading. The public have already been discouraged from attending sales. The organisers are already considering limiting sellers and buyers. They're doing their bit. This is an issue I would like to have discussed with Somerset County Council's, believe it or not, 108,000 a year Director of Public Health. But I will say to the Minister she's hard to reach and appears to be working at home, as indeed I'm afraid most of our county staff soon will be. This doesn't inspire much confidence. I would have expected a decent county council to be making information videos, putting up posters and taking advertising space in the local press to keep us informed. I will say in most counties people are doing it across the House, and it's great to know. I certainly know in Bristol they do. But in Somerset, with its very fat cat top brass, it's, I'm afraid, silent. This disease demands a better response from county councils, and it seems to be wasting time and public money in the case of Somerset on becoming a unitary authority and is not listening to what the people need. I do wish to appeal to the leader of Somerset County Council, please stop posturing and get on with the job. When this dreadful virus is behind us, there's one other thing that farmers fear, and that is a post-Brexit tariff war with Europe. Make no mistake, farming is a vital industry in Somerset. Employs indirectly and directly many hundreds of people, but it is forced to look over its shoulder and count the pennies all the time. We are no longer members of the European Union, but until December we remain part of this, in the system, claim the subsidies and follow the rules. All that will change, particularly for farmers who will continue to farm on the uplands of Exmoor. It has been recognised for the best part of a century that hill farming on Exmoor is only viable because of the subsidy system. Trying to make a living out of some subsidised Exmoor farms would be like trying to make a living, dare I say it, out of a window box. Flippant, but true. But this is not a comfortable living, and I would invite any lowland farmer who thinks Exmoor is a featherbed to spend a hard, wet winter high on the moors, and this year it has been hard and it has been very wet. What we get for our money is the preservation of some of the finest landscape anywhere in the United Kingdom. Landscape which forms the key attractions to the southwest tourism industry. I can show you plenty of evidence, Minister, that the landscape is the #1 reason most people come to Exmoor on holiday, and quite rightly so. And we welcome any members of this House that wish to come and see how beautiful it is. So we must support the hill farmers as generously as we do now. Madam Deputy Speaker, without the hill farmers, much of Exmoor would revert, dare I say, to an ugly, unloved wilderness, all scrub and, paraphrasing, tumbleweed. Much of the moor is still a no-go area for any kind of modern communications. There are dead zones for mobile phones, and internet speeds can be so slow that it's almost quicker to post a letter. I know that progress has been made and things have improved, but we are still in an unparalleled national crisis, and the government wants people to work from home. Rightly so, totally supported by this House. But we need the technical task force to be able to create a quick fix for Exmoor and other cut-off rural parts across the United Kingdom. Broadband is a necessity. It is a miracle that our hill farmers continue to put up with it. And may I say, Mr. Speaker and Madam Deputy Speaker, thank heavens they do. Minister, those who want the land to go back to the wild are not living in the real world. Rewilding may be a fashionable fiction in the Archers, but it is make-believe on places like Exmoor. In any case, only proper farmers, and I say proper farmers, can make it work. You've got to work the land, not learn it in a book. That is why I would like to see the new agricultural bill match every UK subsidy pound for pound, improve the way that farmers are paid, and protect the quality of British products against foreign competition. I do not believe we should tolerate importing inferior goods with lower standards than our own. This new bill has a long way to go, and I'd like the Minister's assurance that there is still time for constructive change, and I'm sure there will be in committee. I've asked a lot in this short debate. Farmers will become more important to us all.
I beg to move this House to now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr Little Granger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It takes me to watch the time more carefully. I've asked a lot in this short debate. Farmers are now becoming more important to us all in the weeks and months ahead. We rely on what they produce in ways that we probably have never considered, but need to now, because we're in national emergency.
To an end, and I've read that Somerset County Council has sold off nearly 2/3 of its agricultural land in the last decade, and one of the things we're looking at in the agriculture bill is how we can better support county farms, and the government has in the past promised that they would do that. Does he think that's a real shame that the council is no longer owns those farms, which often provide an entry to farming for people who can't afford to buy huge swathes of land themselves?
The Honourable Lady knows me well. She tempts me and I will rise to the bait. Yes, I think it's appalling they sold them off. I was totally against county farms being sold off. County farms, Madam Deputy Speaker, were the way that young people got into farming, the way people could get on the farming ladder. These farms were not big, they were comparatively small, but they gave people a chance. Any county that sold them off, I think, is an absolute disgrace. Yes, of course, I know they want the money, but actually we've stopped an entire generation of young people going to farming. The average age of farmers, I'm 61, and my age. How long can we sustain real farmers? And I don't think the government can actually blame for this, although I'd probably quite like to. It can't, because this was actually done over many governments, over many years. Places like Somerset, the old county to which we were all part of in the old days, had a huge amount of farms, and they were enormous, and they did such a good job. They've gone over a long time, probably 3 generations, basically since 1945. But the lady makes an absolute fair point, and I do agree with her. Just one final appeal, Minister. Surgemoor Auction Centre is crucial to farmers, as it is, believe it or not, to all of us here. Whenever our parties, whatever our ages, however much we are at risk, just being here is the fact that we are still in session. We must support and stay in business here. And that goes for our farmers. They want to stay in business there. Thank you very much.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman, the member for Bridgewater and West Somerset, for calling this important debate and for his contribution. He is a passionate advocate for his constituents. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to strike a balance that works for our independent country, to let go of the railings of the sinking ship that is the EU's highly bureaucratic common agricultural policy and its irrational system of area-based payments. But I also recognise, as the honourable gentleman said, that the farming sector is currently facing huge challenges with the current coronavirus crisis. But our Environmental Land Management Scheme, or ELM, will reward farmers for the vital environmental work they do alongside feeding the nation, helping us to meet the targets that we will set through our Environment Bill, reaching our legally binding commitment to reach net zero by 2050 and leave the environment in a better state than we found it. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're working with farmers, foresters and land managers to make sure that we design a much better way of doing things that works as well on farms up and down the country as it does on paper. 40 trials are live in the first phase and a further 25 will follow the second. Somerset is clearly part of this collaboration, and it will be critical to getting our policies absolutely right. And the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group in the southwest are helping us consider an approach to paying farmers for their work on floodplain land and water management, and we will continue to refine our systems together over the coming months. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are optimistic and we're aiming high so that we create a coherent policy designed for our farmers that rewards them properly for their work to improve the environment, creating new habitats, reducing flooding, helping tackle climate change, and that enables them to become more profitable by investing in new equipment, adding value to their product, and improving transparency in the supply chain. That is our approach, tackling the causes of poor profitability, not masking them with an arbitrary area-based subsidy, so that farms of every size and in every part of our country have a chance to thrive. And that includes Somerset. And the smaller farms that the honourable gentleman mentioned should feel equally optimistic about the opportunities this bespoke way of doing things will bring for their businesses. Madam Deputy Speaker, our food reflects who we are as a country. We care about animals hugely, including farm animals, and we value the high quality, high welfare, sustainably produced food and drink we are fortunate to enjoy at home and that are recognised all around the world, including Somerset's finest. And the honourable gentleman talked of some of the current challenges faced by those producers, but it's fair to say that Somerset has been making cheddar since at least, I think, the 12th century. And what could be more quintessentially British than a hunk of West Country farmhouse cheddar washed down with a cold glass of Somerset cider brandy? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government will always back British farmers. There are some of the very best in the world, taking care of our landscapes and our animals, all while feeding the nation, just as they have done for generation after generation. This is a time of opportunity, but I recognise the challenges for UK agriculture. But we understand that these changes can be daunting as well as presenting opportunity. And we are conscious that farmers need time to plan and adapt for their futures and support to decide what is right for them and for their business. And we will match 2019 levels in every year of this Parliament. As the honourable gentleman mentioned, our agriculture bill is currently making its way through Parliament, and our aim is that it will reach royal assent by the summer. This is of vital importance to the agriculture sector to begin a fair, progressive 7-year transition to a much better way of doing things in 2021. The honourable gentleman mentioned several points in his remarks. The Somerset River Authority, I will commit to write to him about the implications that he described. He mentioned the badger cull. Again, I will talk to the Secretary of State about the points that he raised, and the Sedgemoor Auction Centre in the context of planning, contingency planning around coronavirus. And he made some remarks about the challenges of upland farming. And I think it's fair to say the government is confident that within the new scheme being outlined in the Agriculture Bill, that upland farmers will stand to benefit quite considerably from the new arrangements that the government is bringing in with the Agriculture Bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to close by making this important point. Sustainable farming and food production can and indeed must go hand in hand. No one understands this better than our farmers right across the country. After all, the great outdoors is their office day in and day out. And after a hot summer and an incredibly wet winter, they are the first to feel the effects of climate change in our countryside, and they are hungry for change. This is our chance to do things differently and put our farmers, like those in Somerset, at the very heart of our efforts to tackle the causes and consequences of climate change in a way that helps nature recover too. I hope that you will all support the ambitious Agriculture Bill currently making its way through this place, so that we can chart a new course for English agriculture for decades to come, a new way of doing things for the world to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
House of Commons sound. House of Commons sound. House of Commons sound. House of Commons sound. House of